This is the Victoria Hall in Hanley, one of the first public buildings to show moving pictures. Town halls were also popular places. They weren't story films, they were what the Sentinel called animated photographs. The Lumiere brothers gave the first paid public film show in Paris in December 1895, and their collections of short films were shown all over the UK during 1896. Most people first saw moving pictures in touring fairgrounds. Amongst the rides would be a booth called a bioscope, or cinematograph, with an elaborate frontage like other sideshows. The Staffordshire showman Pat Collins ran a bioscope, and his is the only surviving frontage, complete with lights and mechanical organ. The earliest surviving films of this area date from 1900 to 1904, taken by Blackburn camera makers Mitchell and Kenyon. Let's take a few moments to have a close look at them. These are new prints taken from the original negatives. Some are very blotchy and distorted with age, but some are crystal clear. A collier's train arriving in a station in 1900. Workers of Brough Nicholson and Hall's Silkworks in Leek in 1901. North Staffordshire Railway workers coming out of the Stoke Loco Works. Workers leaving Johnson's factory. Wardle and Davenport Silkworks, Leek. And Stoke beating Notts Forest 4-1 on October the 1st, 1904. Films were still being shown in fairground bioscopes and converted premises, and on the bill at the music halls. Local temperance lecturer George Barber gave magic lantern shows, then began showing moving pictures. This early film of his shows the backs of Nash Peak Street in Tunstall. Films were getting longer and more sophisticated. Action and adventure, romance and spectacle were now seen alongside local newsreels. But the Cinema Act of 1909 put a stop to the showing of films in converted premises. There'd been many fires caused by the inflammable nitrate film igniting in the early hand-cranked projectors. Now films could only be shown in custom-built picture houses, with a separate projection room and sufficient fire exits. George Barber was the first man to open a cinema in the Potteries on October the 12th, 1909. It was the Picture Palace and stood here in Tunstall in Station Road. Later he moved next door to what was a skating rink, converted that into a larger cinema, and the remains of that cinema, with its 1930s Art Deco facade, stood here in Station Road, Tunstall.
This was never referred to as the Hippodrome, but always as the Blood Tub. This was a wooden structure, of course, and as a boy, my father was in the orchestra, which consisted of 4 players. I was fortunate, as a lad, to get a job selling oranges, programmes and chocolates. Later on, as I developed, I got to the call boy and eventually got onto the limes. It had a very steep slope on the floor, and it was all wood, and in the gods, the gallery, they had just planks fitted on iron legs, you see. Now, people used to take bottles of beer, and when they'd done with them, especially those at the top, would drop them on the floor, and there would be a rail chase down, hitting these iron standards, clock, 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 bang, bang, while the show was going on. And it would be nothing after each show to go and collect 40 or 50 bottles up that people had left, you see.
The Hippodrome reopened to present film shows as well as variety theatre. This photo shows it in 1935, decorated for King George V's Silver Jubilee.
Well, here we are down the Moorland Road in Burslem, Bennett's Bursley, and we're looking today at the Moorland Road Cinema, which was built in 1912. It wasn't the first cinema in Burslem. There was many a picture house. In fact, Burslem was the entertainment centre of the Potteries. It had music halls, it had pubs, it had concert arenas, it had a skating rink. But this was the first purpose-built cinema. And you can see from the design, if you look carefully, it has these sort of pyramids on each side, giving it that oriental look, which is why Bennett called it the Imperial Deluxe. It's built to fit the geology of the area. You can see on the side that there's a natural slope going down the bank. So the auditorium has a natural slope towards the cinema screen. And if you were to go around the back of this building, you would find that there were 2 exits at the back, either side of the screen. The importance of this building, the Moorland Road Cinema to Bennett, is that he used it as the site of an important meeting in his novel The Price of Love, which was published in 1914 on the eve of war.
Well, I'm standing here at the top of Bourne's Bank, and this vacant piece of land you can see was the site of the old picture palace. And I would have been standing here looking at the Coliseum, 2 cinemas, and then a further cinema added beyond the picture palace. 3 cinemas in a row in Burslem.
But it did get a world premiere in a place called Burslem. It did, you know, and I'll never forget because I went up there and strange as it may seem, it packed him out. Oh, it was so dark in places you had to strike matches to see it. The courting couples liked it, though.
Now, from the Cinemas Act of 1909, there were more cinemas built in the next decade from 1909-1910 than any other decade. Yet the war broke out. Filmmaking in this country was stopped, but people wanted to see films. And this is where we started to rent films from America particularly, and we got used to the American product, which was very good. But they had to be delivered. They were delivered on lorries, they came on the rail system, they were collected from the station, but supply wasn't very reliable. So William Rhodes, who was the manager of the Picture Palace, very enterprisingly had a film made of his own, a feature film, filmed in Burslem during the summer months of 1918 and first shown in September 1918. And it was called A Pottery Girl's Romance, and it was made for this particular cinema, and there was only one copy made. And we're fortunate to have some of that remaining. So this is the actual site which saw the premiere of A Pottery Girl's Romance.
When the old hippodrome was open at Burslem, we were in a delight going in a chip shop asking if they got a ticket for the Burslem hippodrome. You'd walk in half fare and you got full entertainment, 2 shows a night. I mean, it was marvellous. And then they have to close it down. They closed the Coliseum, they closed the Palace, they closed the Globe, they closed the Palladium. All those in Burslem, bang. But what for one bingo hall? I asked you.
Well, we're down on the canal side at Steelite International, and our film opens with the 2 villains, the villain and his accomplice, talking by the canal side, but the canal is very wide. I can see the far bank, but there's water behind them stretching this way. Now there's only one place on the canal in Middleport where the canal is this wide, and it's a turning place so boats could turn, and it's here on the canal which was at Keeling's, now Steelight International. So this scene was shot exactly where I'm standing now. We're in the yard of Steelight International. And in 1918, this was Keeling's pot bank, where our story is set. And the pottery girl and the other workers come out from the factory through one of these brick and stone arches. And the factory still has one of these arches left. It's clearly the same architecture as in 1918. We're on the south side of Newcastle Street as it goes up towards Burslem, in 1918 this building in front of me wasn't built, but this corner is the corner of the building with steps coming down, and it's up here that the two villains follow our pottery girl as she walks up towards Burslem. Now we know this is the actual corner because if you look at the level of the floor, it ends about 2 feet 6 from the ground, and that's why you needed steps down from the doorway. As it curves around, the building with the bright blue signs on was a public house, and it has the public house signs on it. Beyond that, you can see the garden of Portland House with a tree, and those trees are still there. So we know this terrace of houses and this curve of hillside is where we followed the pottery girl up into Burslem, and that is where the story really starts. Well, we're in the Market Square, and this is the doorway to the Liberal Club, which was built some 10 years before the film was made. And it's in this doorway behind me that the villain was lurking when they were following her up from coming out of work down at the pot bank. They've come up Newcastle Street, the villain's lurking here, comes out and follows his assistant, who's persuaded the girl to go and help him with some ruse. She falls for it, and he comes out and follows them, and then he will have a fight and all sorts of things will happen then. But here we are, they've just come up the hill, he's been lurking in here, comes out of this very doorway in 1918. Well, we're walking around Burslem with still photographs of scenes from the film A Pottery Girl's Romance, finding the locations where it was shot. And this is Badley Street at the top of Burslem, Scotia Road you can see going away behind me, and behind me here on this corner were the doors for the fire station. And this is where the fire engines came out and went to address the fire that is the climactic moment of the film. Down the end of the road there is still the scout hut. The terrace houses that were here were called Fireman's Row, and they were the volunteer firemen. You could commandeer a horse from the street. They had their own horses too, and this is where they exited, and we see them coming out, and we can see this hilltop and Scotia Road behind us in the film. We've come a bit further back now. In this shot you can see the fire station in the background with the fire engines coming out. This side you can see beyond me the top buildings on Scotia Road, and then the fire engines swing past the camera down to Market Square. Well, this is the marketplace at the bottom of the Market Square. Over my left shoulder you can see the leopard, which is seen in the film, And over my right-hand shoulder, you can see the edge of the old town hall. In the distance, the Wedgwood big house, and also on that side, you can see the old shambles, the meat market, which was demolished many years ago. But it's along here that you get the best close shots of all the fire engines steaming to the rescue. And they're going from here, they're going down Newcastle Street to the fire in Stubb Street. I'm standing outside the main entrance of Steelite International, a short street that was called Stubb Street. And the corner of Stubb Street here had a curved brick wall, which was the corner of the Great Eastern Public House. And here is Newcastle Street, which it joined. Now, the fire was staged in one of the houses that was in Stubb Street here, and it was really set alight, as you can see in the film. So the fire engines that turned out in Burslem steamed down Newcastle Street to the rescue and arrived here in Stubb Street, Middleport.
Fire engines steam through the centre of Burslem towards the fire in Stub Street.
And it was a grand day, one of the dazzling, spectacular blue and gold days of early summer. The old square was a swarming mass of heads, out of which rose banners and pennons. The men, too, by their neckties and rosettes, added colour to colour. And from many windows and roofs, flags waved heavily against the gorgeous sky. The band was collected round the red baize platform at the top of the square, and the euphoniums, trumpets and cornets made a glittering circle about the officials and ministers and their wives and women. All denominations, for one day only, fraternised effusively together on that platform. Then a bugle call, and a voice that had filled fields in excited times of religious revival floated in thunder across the square.
Let us sing!
And in a moment, the entire multitude was singing.
These are the ATV studios at Elstree, where they built an outdoor set for their production of Clayhanger, adapted from the novel by Arnold Bennett.
Stand by, everybody, please. We're going to go for another take on this. Don't forget the musket, instruments down.
Okay, how are you fixed?
Stand by, please.
Okay, how are you fixed, David?
We're ready. Roll the tape.
Rolling tape, please.
Scene 43, slate 52, take 2.
Hey!
Bennett wrote many stories about life in the Potteries, but he called them the Five Towns, and this label remains. He thought five sounded better. He missed out Fenton, and it never forgave him.
Well, I was a new first inspector at Burslem, which was most unusual, and round about the same time my superintendent told me that the card was going to be made. They may need a little help and guidance because other local services would be involved, and he just gave me an open mandate to, can I say, quote, please myself. Police work was the main thing, and that was done, but what I enjoyed doing was meeting Ronnie Eames and John Bryan. They were extremely kind. They told me they were staying at Ashbank. They were going to do some filming off Newcastle Street, and if they needed any guidance or support or backup with other services, could they get in touch with me? And I said, yes, by all means. And that's about the extent of my mandate. But of course, what it involved really was meeting one or two nice people. Particularly do I remember Ronnie Eames and John Bryan. I didn't see anything or much of Alec Guinness because he was travelling to and from. He was doing things in London, I think on the stage, perhaps on films. Petula Clark was a teenage girl, very sweet, very nice indeed, I thought. But the man I liked very much was Edward Chapman. I vaguely remember all these things because I'm now nearly 87 and memory does lapse a little bit. But the other thing I remember, apart from the fire services and other people who we tried to help as much as we could, I shouldn't say this as a police officer, but it is a fact. I was amazed at the extent of the catering organisation that they used as a backup. And I came to the conclusion that good food, as always, was a very necessary part of not only everyday life, but making films.
Well, I was a driver cum chauffeur for a company that had got the contract to drive the film people about, the crew and the stars. We used to collect them from mainly Stoke Station, take them to the hotels, and then the next morning we would take them on location wherever they wanted to go. Alec Guinness and all the rest of the cast. And it was very interesting. Sometimes I wondered how on earth they ever turned a film out for the things that went wrong. Such as, I remember they were pulling I don't know, it's a donkey or a mule, and he wouldn't go, and suddenly, and it was only a few streets away, a PMT bus went past with engine trouble, and of course, with that noise, they had to stop. So they had to retake that, and things like another scene, they were shooting off some steps somewhere in Burslem, I can't remember where, and an aeroplane went over, and that again stopped them. They had to start again. And I remember the cameraman, I think he was a Cockney, I would be 100 yards away, and in Cockney he said something like, well, it sounded like "oh bother," but it was obviously worse than that. And another instance was they were taking a shot somewhere and asked me to cover up a sign of Stoke Speedway with a potato bag. And otherwise than that, it all went pretty good.
Well, I don't think I'd been out of the army long, and I just heard that they were doing the filming in Middleport, and it happened to be my holiday from work, and I went down with my camera and took quite a few. I'm sorry, these are the only ones I can find now, and I spent most of the week there. Port Vale Street, it's just off Newcastle Street, and in those days part of it had been demolished, and that's why there was that clear land between me and where the cobble street was, because it was the old-fashioned cobble street, you know. Originally, you can see the backs of the other houses, which hadn't been demolished, but it was a cobbled, yeah.
The cars we used, mainly the big one we used was an American big straight 8 Buick, and the stars used to love riding in that, and we also used Austin Black Taxi, and I think the other car, although it's a long time ago, Ray, I think the other car was a Wolsey, but I won't be sure. We used to alternate the three, depending on how many wanted transporting from A to B. But it was a nice time, yeah, enjoyed it.
Well, apart from seeing what was going on, it wasn't, there wasn't a lot. It seemed to be ages between bits of filming, you know. Well, I asked one of the boys who like a go for, you know, I asked him if I could get a photograph, and he came across to me, and I took the photograph and dashed over to the chemist as soon as I'd finished, and asked him if he could get it through me a bit quick, because it used to be a minimum those days of about a week, you know, to get a film done, and he got me done in 2 days, and I went back and asked the same boy if he could get him to sign me, and he came across to sign it for me. He said, "Why did you cut my feet off?" He's quite a friendly chap. He seemed a nice fella. I wasn't talking to him long, you know, only a couple of minutes like.
Oh, he was a proper gentleman. Definite gentleman. In fact, he was so good I thought he used to come from the Potteries. But I did ask the producer why they were talking in a northern accent and not a Potteries accent. He says, Clive, he says, I've been here nearly a week now and I can't damn well understand them, so nobody down south would be able to.
When they decided to make Arnold Bennett's story of the card, they came down to Middleport, the film crew, and of course Alec Guinness took the part of Dendry Machin. He was the star of the show, of course, Alec Guinness. But there's also another star, and that was Joey, the mule. And his job was to take Dendry Machin round on the little cart, collecting the rents. Apparently a problem occurred on the set, on the film set, and it was that Joey, as you know, donkeys and mules normally spend their life on grass or sand. Our poor Joey was wearing his feet away on the cobblestones down Middleport, and this of course caused a problem. So a blacksmith was needed. Well, they decided to choose Percy Barton at Cobridge, but the only problem was that they got no transport for Joey to take him there, and somebody had the bright idea to use a furniture van. So he travelled the 2 miles to Cobridge in the back of a furniture van, and Percy was telling me that he was so surprised when this van drove up outside, and he was even more surprised when Joey came out the back. And now normally the size of the shoes that Percy was doing for the normal work horse of the day was that sort of size. Now Percy decided that he got to make a set of shoes. Alec, his brother, was also, well, he was a shoesmith, Alec was, and he normally made the shoes. But on this occasion, Percy, and he said this to me, he says, they were the smallest set of shoes that I've ever made. And they were even smaller than that, and that's the smallest shoe that I found. And Percy made the set of shoes, as I say, and Alec, he fitted the shoes on Joey. And so it was nice that the Bartons of Cobridge saved the day. And there's a lovely sequence in the film, and Joey is obviously very proud of his new shoes, and you can see him trotting along the cobblestones of Middleport, which was really nice. And he, as I say, was showing these new shoes off. When Percy, just before Percy retired, I persuaded him to make me a shoe. And that is the last shoe that Percy made, and it made in the conventional way from a bar of iron, not like the modern farriers use today, where they order a load of shoes and then customise them to the horse. And Percy made me that shoe, and it's something that I shall always treasure.
Yes, the card, Alec Guinness played Dendry Machin, and his son Matthew played Dendry Machin as a boy, and I played Dendry Machin as a baby. I understand it took about 3 days or so just to film my brief 30 seconds of crying, and that was about it. Obviously I don't remember anything about the film whatsoever. All I know really is what I've read about it and what my parents have told me.
It all began with a phone call from a friend of mine who worked with Mr. Steele, who was in charge of finding a baby and a boy to take the role of Dendry Machin in the card. There'd been great excitement for weeks in the paper, and they hadn't found this boy or baby yet. So I was asked, my friend knew Paul and thought he would be all right for the part. So Mr. Steele came over to see him and said, would I take him for an audition? So a taxi arrived and we went to visit director Neame and John Bryan. And as soon as they saw Paul, they said, at last, we found the baby. So shooting began, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 days later, and the taxi arrived each morning, and Paul was given props to dress in and so forth, and he found it all so very, very interesting. So interesting that they couldn't make him cry, which was all he was needed to do. However, they made loud noises, they pulled faces at him, but nothing worked. He thought it was very funny. And then they gave him a hammer. I still don't know what for, but he became interested in it, and suddenly they took it away when he became interested. And wow, he cried. He broke his heart. And of course the cameras whirred, and that was it. But it took 3 days to make a baby cry. Oh yes, the first day of the filming, John Bryan appeared and said, what are we going to show for Hereditary? So I thought, well, everyone just looked at him. So I suggested a centre parting. Great. So someone produced a comb, so I did Paul's hair first. And then Alec Guinness appeared, sat on the chair in front of me, and I gave him a centre parting, you see. And that's how the centre parting ran through the film.
I collected them from Ash Hall Hotel, brought them into Hanley, pulled up outside the Odeon, and I've never seen such a crowd in all my life. There was crowds of people. They got out of the cars and went into the foyer. We thought, oh, well, me and my friend, we'd got to just park up and wait while the film was shown. But they said, oh no, there's a seat waiting for you two. And we left the cars, went up into I think we was in the circle. When we got into the circle, we were presented with the programme of the card that had been autographed, like to Clive, Glynis Johns, Valerie Hobson, Petula Clark, Alec Guinness, and all the rest of the crew, cameramen, soundmen, the lot. So that was a real surprise.
This is the programme that was given to me by the people at the Odeon Theatre, and it was the programme that was signed Best Wishes John Bryan, and thank you Ronald Neames, and Pet Clark just said best wishes, and Edward Chapman just said good luck, and they all said, Trevor, it's been nice to know you. And that is on the first page of the programme. Incidentally, there is a very good photograph of Edward Chapman on page 16 of the programme, and in those days he was a particularly well-known character actor. He always reminded me a little bit of his approach, mannerisms of Gilbert Harding. I'm talking as an old man now, but everybody who is of my age will remember Gilbert Harding. There's a very good photograph of Ronald Neame on page 19, and a very good photograph also on that page of John Bryan. Two very charming men, and two men that I thoroughly enjoyed meeting and became quite friendly with. I really think the rest of the programme speaks for itself. That's just a little background to the personalities and people that I had the privilege of knowing.
Well, my father was the chief photographer at the Sentinel, and he had a lot to do with the card. The premiere, I was chosen, because I was his daughter, I suppose, to present a bouquet of flowers to Petula Clark. And on the night I went there with my mother and father and a next door neighbour who was going to bring me home afterwards. And I was in awe of all the dresses and everything that was going on, and I was shaking because it was worrying me to death that I was going to make a mistake, you know, when I got on stage or whatever. But it didn't. Petula Clark was a lovely lady, and in the bouquet of flowers, somebody had broken a rose off. Well, half broke it off, so that she could give it back to me, so she didn't stand there twisting, you know, the rose. And when I went on stage, I had to point out, sort of surreptitiously, which rose it was that she got to give back to me. So it was absolutely lovely. And then, to cap it all, I met Edward Chapman, who was a lovely, lovely man, and he sat me on his knee and was talking to me, and I had very, very long hair in those days. I could sit on my hair, and we call them pigtails, of course, in those days, and he kept pulling these pigtails and saying, "What beautiful hair you've got." I didn't like it very much. I wish I'd got it now, I can tell you. But that's what I can remember, and it was absolutely lovely, the things that I can remember about the premiere of the card, particularly Petula Clark's dress, which to me, I was only 11 in those days, was something that I've never seen before, you know. It was really lovely.
At the time, I think I've said before, I was getting £3 a week as wages, and when I took Petula Clark and her father back to Stoke Station, they gave me a tenner as a tip, because they said I'd been so good. So that was worth something.
Now, I was invited to the Odeon cinema, which was a first, as far as I know, in this city, for a premiere film performance. My wife and I were delighted to have been asked along, as I suppose, part of the official party, to go to the show. And Pet Clark was really quite lovely, and I think she was probably in her teens. And there's Len Barber. Much credit to him. He was very busy with Keel, getting it going, and Pet's just wagged a little finger at him. He's got a wry sense of humour. There, I think, it looks to me like John Bryan, and he was the producer. And there we go, Pet being taken in by Edward Chapman and all the galaxy of important people with lovely dresses on, lovely gowns, and a splendid evening had by all.
This is Denry Machin, the card, a young man whose irrepressible gaiety of disposition and unfailing flair for courageous action on the right occasion won him astonishing success.
You pick things up easily, don't you?
Yes. You? For him, all things were possible. His progress mystified his friends, enraged his enemies, and surprised even himself with its swiftness. What woman could resist the magnet of such spectacular success? Even the Countess of Chell herself, who far surpassed his dreams of womanhood, fell victim to his charm. How could such wealth and elegance fail to attract the entrancing, unpredictable Ruth Earp?
Oh, but I'm sure you're the sort of man who could do anything if he wants to. Ashtray?
Then there was Nellie. Wistful, childlike, adorable Nellie.
But what about Ruth?
Oh, hang Ruth. She can take care of herself.
Denry didn't mean it, Ruth. He's very sorry. I will not submit to insult. No, of course not. Denry, your ring. Our engagement is at an end. Ruth.
If I were you, Mr. Michael, aloft, you'll get hard down here. Only the Potters can take care of ourselves.